How did this happen so fast? Wrong question, and the wrong mindset. In 1978, the average Chinese citizen earned less than $200 a year. Today, China builds more infrastructure in a month than most countries build in a decade. It's the world's second largest economy, sitting on over $3 trillion in foreign reserves and manufacturing roughly a third of everything the world buys. The West keeps asking, how did this happen so fast? Wrong question. It wasn't fast, it was invisible. December 1978, Beijing. Deng Xiaoping stands in front of the Communist Party and says 4 words that will reshape global economics. To get rich is glorious. But he doesn't open China's economy. Not really. He opens 4 cities. Just 4. Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen. Small fishing villages, special economic zones where foreign companies can set up factories, pay low wages, and export goods without the usual communist bureaucracy. The deal is simple. You bring your technology, your capital, your supply chains. We give you cheap labor, tax breaks, and a government that actually wants you here. Western companies look at 1 billion potential customers and drool. What they miss is the fine print. If you want access to China's market, you don't just build a factory, you bring a Chinese partner. You share your blueprints, you train Chinese engineers, you teach Chinese managers how your systems work. It's called a joint venture, but it's really a technology transfer with extra steps. General Motors enters China in 1997. Within 10 years, Chinese engineers understand every detail of their manufacturing process. Fast forward to today, Chinese EV companies like BYD are outcompeting Tesla in their own market. The West thinks we're getting cheap manufacturing. China thinks we're getting an education, and they're patient students. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. From 1980 to 2010, China grows at an average of 10% per year. Not for 1 year, not for 5, for 30 years. No large economy in human history has sustained this. But growth isn't magic, it's math. And China's math is powered by 3 forces most countries can't replicate. First, labor mobilization on an unthinkable scale. Between 1990 and 2010, roughly 300 million people moved from rural farms to urban factories. That's the entire population of the United States, relocated in 2 decades. These workers accept wages a fraction of what Western workers demand. They live in factory dormitories, they work 6 days a week, and they save nearly 40% of their income, one of the highest savings rates on Earth. This isn't exploitation in the traditional sense. For millions, it's the first escape from subsistence farming their families have known in generations. But it creates a labor cost advantage so extreme that entire industries relocate. Textiles, electronics, heavy machinery. If it can be made cheaper in China, it will be. By 2001, when China joins the World Trade Organization, it's not competing with other developing nations anymore. It's competing with everyone and winning. Second force, infrastructure spending that defies economic logic. China doesn't build roads when it needs them, it builds them before it needs them. Highways, bridges, high-speed rail, entire cities designed for populations that don't exist yet. By 2020, China has more high-speed rail than the rest of the world combined. Over 40,000 kilometers of track connecting cities most people outside China have never heard of. The West debates years whether to build a single train line, environmental studies, budget approvals, community consultations. China announces a project on Monday, breaks ground on Wednesday. This isn't just efficiency. This is a government that can move billions of dollars into construction without needing voter approval or quarterly earnings reports. When Western economists see empty airports and ghost cities, they call it waste. When Chinese planners see them, they call it preparation. And here's the trick.
Even if half these projects never reach capacity, the construction itself creates jobs, demand, and GDP growth. The government doesn't care if a bridge is profitable, it cares if building the bridge keeps people employed. Third force, state capitalism with Chinese characteristics. And this is where most countries copying China make a fatal mistake. China's economy isn't communist, it's not capitalist either. It's something in between that doesn't fit into any textbook. The government doesn't just regulate industries, it owns them, or parts of them, or controls the supply chains that feed them. Banks lend to state-owned enterprises at rates that don't make commercial sense. Local governments hand out land practically free. Unprofitable sectors keep running because employment matters more than profit margins. Take steel. China produces more steel than the next 10 countries combined, much of it at a loss. Western steel companies scream about unfair competition. China keeps producing anyway because the Communist Party isn't optimizing for shareholder returns. It's optimizing for industrial capacity, employment, and geopolitical leverage. This creates a system where the party acts like a venture capitalist with infinite patience and the entire country as its portfolio. You can't compete with that using normal market logic. But here's the part that breaks the narrative. While the West celebrates globalization and free trade, China never actually opens its economy the way it promised. Foreign companies can sell to China, but they can't own distribution. They can manufacture, but not without local partners who mysteriously become competitors 5 years later. Google launches in China in 2006, gets blocked in 2010. Facebook tries to enter, blocked. Amazon goes head-to-head with Alibaba, loses badly, not because Alibaba is better, because the playing field isn't level. Foreign payment systems can't operate freely. Foreign cloud services face restrictions. Foreign media gets censored. The rules aren't written in law, they're enforced through bureaucratic delays, sudden regulatory changes, and quiet pressure. And the World Trade Organization does nothing, because trade rules assume countries want open markets. China wants control. It plays by the rules just enough to avoid penalties and bends them everywhere else. The strategy isn't cheating, it's patience. Western capitalism optimizes for next quarter. Chinese planning optimizes for next generation. By 2010, something shifts. China doesn't need foreign blueprints anymore. It has the factories, it has the engineers, it has entire supply chains. Companies like Huawei aren't copying Western tech, they're leading it. In 5G infrastructure, in telecommunications equipment, in patents filed, Huawei surpasses Ericsson and Nokia. DJI dominates the global drone market. BYD becomes the world's largest EV manufacturer. TikTok conquers social media in a way no Chinese app ever has. China isn't joining the global tech economy anymore, it's reshaping it. And then comes the Belt and Road Initiative. Xi Jinping announces a plan to finance and build infrastructure across 150 countries. Ports in Pakistan, railways in Kenya, power plants in Indonesia. The pitch is simple. We'll finance your development, build it faster than the West, and we won't lecture you about democracy or human rights. Over the next decade, China commits over $1 trillion. Some projects succeed, many don't. But success isn't the only goal. When Sri Lanka can't repay its loans, it hands over Hambantota port to China for 99 years. When Malaysia borrows for a railway, the contracts go to Chinese firms using Chinese workers and Chinese steel. When African nations need 5G networks, Huawei is already there with financing and installation teams. This isn't charity, it's leverage. The West spent centuries building influence through colonization, then military alliances, then institutions like the IMF and World Bank. China is doing it with concrete, debt, and infrastructure. And it's working. Dozens of countries now depend on Chinese financing for critical projects. That creates political alignment. When the UN votes on human rights in Xinjiang, Belt and Road countries stay quiet. When Taiwan is discussed, they back Beijing. Economic dependence becomes geopolitical power. But here's where the cracks start showing. China's model only works under specific conditions: a massive low-cost labor force, a government willing to subsidize entire sectors at a loss, a population that saves instead of spends, and critically, access to foreign markets while restricting access to your own. Every single one of these conditions is breaking down. China's workforce is aging faster than almost any country in history. By 2040, there will be more retirees than workers. The one-child policy, designed to control population, is now a demographic time bomb. Fewer workers mean higher wages. Higher wages mean manufacturing moves to Vietnam, India, Bangladesh. Debt levels are exploding. Local governments borrowed heavily to fund infrastructure. State-owned enterprises kept expanding regardless of profitability. By some estimates, total debt is over 300% of GDP. That's not sustainable, not even for China. Consumer behavior is shifting.
China doesn't want to save 40% of their income. They want apartments, cars, travel. But the economy was built on savings fueling investment. Consumption-driven growth requires a different model, and transitions are messy. And finally, the world is pushing back. The U.S. implements tariffs, export controls on semiconductors, restrictions on Chinese tech companies. Europe follows. Even developing countries are rethinking Belt and Road deals, calling them debt traps. China got rich by being the world's factory, but the world is rethinking whether it wants one factory. In 2023, China's GDP growth drops below 5%. For most countries, that's respectable. For China, it's a warning. Youth unemployment hits record levels. The property sector collapses. Evergrande, once the world's most valuable real estate company, defaults on over $300 billion in debt. The model that created the fastest economic rise in modern history is hitting its limits. China knows this. That's why Xi Jinping talks about common prosperity and dual circulation. The goal is to reduce dependence on exports and build a domestic consumption economy, to shift from manufacturing to technology,